Good evening and welcome to the Deanery at Canterbury. It's a lovely thing on these nights which grow dark quite quickly after supper to sit and read some Charles Dickens, and no one is more satisfying to read than Dickens himself, who had such a wonderful way with words. So often his stories, even the long ones, would be published in episodes in magazines, and people would wait for them and then read them aloud to one another. And at this time, when we've spent so much time indoors with lockdown in our particular situations, then the reading of a story is a lovely thing. Dickens loved stories, and let's think again of Christmas Carol, where ghosts and strange things appear. Nothing too frightening, just it goes well with the candlelight, I think. And when he wrote Pickwick Papers, 2 of the chapters had stories just like that in it. Well, in the magazine all the year round in September 1861, short collection of his ghost stories were published, very short. And the first one caused someone, when reading it, to realize that the story had come from them originally. The man was a portrait painter, and the story as told in the 4 little tales as Dickens had them first published was a very short story. And then Mr. H, shall we call him, a well-known English artist, wrote and said, it's substantially correct, but this is the real story. So here is the portrait painter's story of Mr. H. I am a painter. One morning in May 1858, I was seated in my studio at my usual occupation. At an earlier hour than that at which visits are usually made, I received one from a friend whose acquaintance I had made some year or 2 previously in Richmond Barracks, Dublin. My acquaintance was a captain in the 3rd West York Militia, and from the hospitable manner in which I had been received while a guest with that regiment, as well as from the intimacy that existed between us personally, it was incumbent on me to offer my visitor suitable refreshments. Consequently, 2 o'clock found us well occupied in conversation, cigars and a decanter of sherry. About that hour, a ring at the bell reminded me of an engagement I had made with a model, or a young person who, having a pretty face and neck, earned a livelihood by sitting for artists. Not being in the humour for work, I arranged with her to come on the following day, promising, of course, to remunerate her for her loss of time, and she went away. In about 5 minutes she returned, and speaking to me privately, stated that she had looked forward to the money for the day's sitting and would be inconvenienced by the want of it. Would I let her have a part? There being no difficulty on this point, she again went. Close to the street in which I live there is another of a very similar name, and persons who are not familiar with my address often go to it by mistake. The model's way lay directly through it, and on arriving there, she was accosted by a lady and gentleman who asked if she could inform them where I lived. They had forgotten my right address, and were endeavouring to find me by enquiring of persons whom they met. In a few more minutes, they were shown into my room. My new visitors were strangers to me. They had seen a portrait I had painted, and wished for likenesses of themselves and their children. The price I named did not deter them, and they asked me round. They looked round the studio to select the style and size they should prefer. My friend of the 3rd West York, with infinite address and humour, took upon himself the office of showman, dilating on the merits of the respected works in a manner that the diffidence that is expected in a professional man when speaking of his own productions would not have allowed me to adopt. The inspection proving satisfactory, they asked whether I could paint the pictures at their house in the country, and there being no difficulty on this point, an engagement was made for the following autumn, subject to my writing to fix the time when I might be able to leave town for the purpose. This being adjusted, the gentleman gave me his card, and they left. Shortly afterwards, my friend went also, and on looking for the first time at the card left by the strangers, I was somewhat disappointed to find that though it contained the name of Mr. and Mrs. Kirkbeck, there was no address. I tried to find it by looking at the court guide, but it contained no such name. So I put the card in my writing desk and forgot for a time the entire transaction. Autumn came, and with it a sense of engagements I had made in the north of England. Towards the end of September 1858, I was one of a dinner party at a country house on the confines of Yorkshire and Lincolnshire. Being a stranger to the family, it was by a mere accident that I was at the house at all. I had arranged to pass a day and a night with a friend in the neighbourhood who was intimate at the house and had received an invitation, and the dinner occurring on the evening in question, I had been asked to accompany him. The party was a numerous one, and as the meal approached its termination and was about to subside into the dessert, the conversation became general. I should here mention that my hearing is defective, at some times more so than at others, and on this particular evening I was extra deaf, so much so that the conversation only reached me in the form of a continued din. At one instant, however, I heard a word distinctly pronounced, though it was uttered by a person at a considerable distance from me, and that word was Kirkbeck. In the business of the London season, I had forgotten all about the visitors of the spring who had left their card without the address. The word, reaching me under such circumstances, arrested my attention and immediately recalled the transaction to my remembrance. On the first opportunity that offered, I asked a person whom I was conversing with if a family of the name in question was resident in the neighbourhood. I was told in reply that a Mr. Kirkbeck lived at A, at the farther end of the county. The next morning, I wrote to this person saying that I believed he called at my studio in the spring and had made an arrangement with me which I was prevented fulfilling by there being no address on his card. Furthermore, that I should shortly be in his neighbourhood on my return from the north, but should I be mistaken in addressing him, I begged he would not trouble himself to reply to my note. I gave as my address the post office, York. On applying there 3 days afterwards, I received a note from Mr. Kirkbeck stating that he was very glad he had heard from me, and that if I would call on my return, he would arrange about the pictures. He also told me to write a day before I proposed coming, that he might not otherwise engage himself. It was ultimately arranged that I should go to his house the succeeding Saturday, stay till Monday morning, transact afterwards what matters I had to attend to in London, and return in a fortnight to execute the commission. The day having arrived for my visit, directly after breakfast I took my place in the morning train from York to London. The train would stop at Doncaster, and after that at Retford Junction, where I should have to get out in order to take the line through Lincoln to A. The day was cold, wet, foggy, and in every way as disagreeable as I have ever known a day to be in an English October. The carriage in which I was seated had no other occupant than myself, but at Doncaster a lady got on. My place was back to the engine and next to the door. As that is considered the lady's seat, I offered it to her. She, however, very graciously declined it, and took the corner opposite, saying in a very agreeable voice that she liked to feel the breeze on her cheek. The next few minutes were occupied in locating herself. There was the cloak to be spread under her, the skirts of the dress to be arranged, the gloves to be tightened, and such other trifling arrangements of plumage as ladies are wont to make before settling themselves comfortably at church or elsewhere. The last and most important being the placing back over her hat the veil that concealed her features. I could then see that the lady was young, certainly not more than 2 or 3 and 20, but being moderately tall, rather robust in make, and decided in expression, she might have been 2 or 3 years younger. I suppose that her complexion would be termed a medium one, her hair being of a bright brown or auburn, while her eyes and rather decidedly marked eyebrows were nearly black. The colour of her cheek was of that pale, transparent hue that sets off to such advantage large, expressive eyes, and an equable, firm expression of mouth. On the whole, the ensemble was rather handsome than beautiful, her expression having that agreeable depth and harmony about it that rendered her face and features, though not strictly regular, infinitely more attractive than if they had been modelled upon the strictest rules of symmetry. It is no small advantage on a wet day and a dull, long journey to have an agreeable companion, one who can converse and whose conversation has sufficient substance in it to make one forget the length and the dreariness of the journey. In this respect, I had no deficiency to complain of, the lady being decidedly and agreeably conversational. When she had settled herself to her satisfaction, she asked to be allowed to look at my Bradshaw, and not being proficient in that difficult work, she requested my aid in ascertaining at what time the train passed through Retford again on its way back from London to York. The conversation turned afterwards on general topics, and somewhat to my surprise, she led it into such particular subjects as I might be supposed to be more especially familiar with. Indeed, I could not avoid remarking that her entire manner, while it was anything but forward, was that of one who had either known me personally or by report. There was in her manner a kind of confidential reliance when she listened to me that is not usually accorded to a stranger, and sometimes she actually seemed to refer to different circumstances with which I had been connected in times past. After about 3/4 of an hour's conversation, the train arrived at Retford, where I was to change carriages. On my alighting and wishing her good morning, she made a slight movement of the hand as if she meant me to shake it, and on my doing so, she said by way of adieu, "I dare say we shall meet again," to which I replied, "I hope that we shall all meet again," and so parted, she going on the line to London, and I through Lincolnshire to A. The remainder of the journey was cold, wet, and dreary. I missed the agreeable conversation, and tried to supply its place with a book I had brought with me from York, and the Times newspaper, which I had procured at Retford. But the most disagreeable journey comes to an end at last, and 5:30 in the evening found me at the termination of mine. A carriage was waiting for me at the station, where Mr. Kirkbeck was also expected by the same train. But as he did not appear, it was concluded he would come by the next, half an hour later. Accordingly, the carriage drove away with myself only. The family being from home at the moment, and the dinner hour being 7, I went at once to my room to unpack and to dress. Having completed these operations, I descended to the drawing-room. It probably wanted some time to the dinner hour, as the lamps were not lighted, but in their place a large blazing fire threw a flood of light into every corner of the room, and more especially over a lady who, dressed in deep black, was standing by the chimney place, warming a very handsome foot on the edge of the fender. Her face being turned away from the door by which I had entered, I did not at first see her features. On my advancing into the middle of the room, however, the foot was immediately withdrawn, and she turned round to accost me, when, to my profound astonishment, I perceived that it was none other than my companion in the railway carriage. She betrayed no surprise at seeing me. On the contrary, with one of those agreeable, joyous expressions that make the plainest woman appear beautiful, she accosted me with, "I said we should meet again." My bewilderment at the moment almost deprived me of utterance. I knew of no railway or other means by which she could have come. I had certainly left her in a London train, and had seen it start, and the only conceivable way in which she could have come was by going on to Peterborough, and then returning by a branch to a circuit of about 90 miles. As soon as my surprise enabled me to speak, I said that I wished I had come by the same conveyance as she herself. "That would have been rather difficult," she rejoined. At this moment the servant came with the lamps, and informed me that his master had just arrived and would be down in a few minutes. The lady took up a book containing some engravings, and having singled one, a portrait of Lady someone, asked me to look at it well and tell her whether I thought it like her. I was engaged trying to get up an opinion when Mr. and Mrs. Kirkbeck entered, and shaking me heartily by the hand, apologized for not being at home to receive me, the gentleman ending by requesting me to take Mrs. Kirkbeck in to dinner. The lady of the house having taken my arm, we marched on. I certainly hesitated a moment to allow Mr. Kirkbeck to pass on first with the mysterious lady in black, but Mrs. Kirkbeck not seeming to understand, we passed on at once. The dinner party, consisting of us four only, we fell into our respective places at the table without difficulty, the mistress and master of the house at the top and bottom, the lady in black and myself on each side. The dinner passed, much as is usual in such occasions. I, having to play the guest, directed my conversation principally, if not exclusively, to my host and hostess, and I cannot countermine that I or anyone else once addressed the lady opposite. Seeing this, and remembering something that looked like a slight want of attention to her, on coming into the dining room, I at once concluded that she was the governess. I observed, however, that she made an excellent dinner. She seemed to appreciate both the beef and the tart, as well as a glass of claret afterwards. Probably she had had no luncheon, or the journey had given her an appetite. The dinner ended, the ladies retired, and after the usual port, Mr. Kirkbeck and I joined them in the drawing-room. By this time, however, a much larger party had assembled. Brothers and sisters-in-law had come in from their residences in the neighbourhood, and several children, with Miss Hardwick, their governess, were also introduced to me. I saw at once that my supposition as to the lady in black being the governess was incorrect. After passing the time necessarily occupied in complimenting the children, and saying something to the different persons to whom I was introduced, I found myself again engaged in conversation with the lady of the railway carriage, and as the topic of the evening had referred principally to portrait painting, she continued the subject. "Do you think you could paint my portrait?" the lady inquired. "Yes, I think I could, if I had the opportunity." "Now, look at my face well. Do you think you should recollect my features?" "Yes, I am sure I should never forget your features." "Of course, I might have expected you to say that, but do you think you could do me from recollection? Well, if it be necessary, I will try. But can't you give me any sittings? No, quite impossible. It could not be. It is said that the print I showed to you before dinner is like me. Do you think so? Not much, I replied. It has not your expression. If you can give me only one sitting, it will be better than none. No, I don't see how it could be. The evening being by this time rather far advanced, and the chamber candles being brought in, on the plea of being rather tired, she shook me heartily by the hand and wished me good night. My mysterious acquaintance caused me no small pondering during the night. I had never been introduced to her. I had not seen her speak to anyone during the entire evening, not even to wish them good night. How she got across the country was an inexplicable mystery. Then, why did she wish me to paint her from memory? And why could she not give me even one sitting? Finding the difficulties of a solution to these questions rather increase upon me, I made up my mind to defer further consideration of them till breakfast time, when I suppose the matter would receive more elucidation. The breakfast now came, but with it no lady in black. The breakfast over, we went to church, came home to luncheon, and so on through the day, but still no lady, neither any reference to her. I then concluded that she must be some relative who had gone away early in the morning to visit another member of the family living close by. I was much puzzled, however, by no reference whatever being made to her, and finding no opportunity of leading any part of my conversation with the family towards the subject, I went to bed the second night more puzzled than ever. On the servant coming in the morning, I ventured to ask him the name of the lady who dined at the table on the Saturday evening, to which he answered, "A lady, sir." "No lady, only Mrs. Kirkbeck, sir." "Yes, the lady that sat opposite me dressed in black." "Perhaps Miss Hardwick, the governess, sir?" "No, not Miss Hardwick. She came down afterwards." "No lady, as I see, sir." "Oh dear me, yes, the lady dressed in black that was in the drawing-room when I arrived before Mr. Kirkbeck came home." The man looked at me with surprise, as if he doubted my sanity, and only answered, "I never see any lady, sir," and then left. The mystery now appeared more impenetrable than ever. I thought it over in every possible aspect, but could come to no conclusion upon it. Breakfast was early that morning, in order to allow of my catching the morning train to London. The same came also slightly hurried us. The same cause also slightly hurried us, and allowed no time for conversation beyond that having direct reference to the business that brought me there. So, after arranging to return to paint the portraits on that day, 3 weeks, I made my adieus and took my departure for town. It is only necessary for me to refer to my second visit, so that house, in order to state that I was assured most positively, both by Mr. and Mrs. Kirkbeck, that no fourth person dined at the table on the Saturday evening in question. Their recollection was clear on the subject, as they had debated whether they should ask Miss Hardwick, the governess, to take the vacant seat, but had decided not to do so. Neither could they recall to mind any such person as I described in the whole circle of their acquaintance. Some weeks passed. It was close upon Christmas. The light of a short winter day was drawing to a close, and I was seated at my table writing letters for the evening post. My back was towards the folding doors, leading into the room in which my visitors usually waited. I had been engaged some minutes in writing when, without hearing or seeing anything, I became aware that a person had come through the folding doors and was then standing beside me. I turned and beheld the lady of the railway carriage. I suppose that my manner indicated that I was somewhat startled, as the lady, after the usual salutation, said, "Pardon me for disturbing you. You did not hear me come in." Her manner, though it was more quiet and subdued than I had known it before, was hardly to be termed grave, still less sorrowful. There was a change, but it was that kind of change only which may often be observed from the frank impulsiveness of an intelligent young lady to the composure of self-possession of that same young lady when she is either betrothed or has recently become a matron. She asked me whether I had made any attempt at a likeness of her. I was obliged to confess that I had not. She regretted it much, as she wished one for her father. She had brought an engraving, a portrait of Lady M.A. with her, that she thought would assist me. It was like the one she had asked my opinion upon in the house in Lincolnshire. It had always been considered very like her, and she would leave it with me. Then, putting her hand impressively on my arm, she added, "I really would be most thankful and grateful to you if you would do it." And, if I recollect rightly, she added, "As much depends on it." Seeing she was so much in earnest, I took up my sketchbook, and by the dim light that was still remaining, began to make a rapid pencil sketch of her. On observing my doing so, however, instead of giving me what assistance she was able, she turned away under pretence of looking at the pictures around the room, occasionally passing from one to another so as to enable me to catch a momentary glimpse of her features. In this manner, I made 2 hurried but rather expressive sketches of her, which, being all that the declining light would allow me to do, I shut my book, and she prepared to leave. This time, instead of the usual "good morning," she wished me an impressively pronounced "goodbye," firmly holding rather than shaking my hand while she said it. I accompanied her to the door, outside of which she seemed rather to fade into the darkness than to pass through it. But I refer this impression to my own fancy. I immediately inquired of the servant why she had not announced a visitor to me. She stated that she was not aware there had been one, and that anyone who had entered must have done so when she had left the street door open about half an hour previously, while she went across the road for a moment. Soon after this, I had to fulfil an engagement at a house near Bosworth Field in Leicestershire. I left town on a Friday, having sent some pictures that were too large to take with me by the luggage train a week previously, in order that they might be at the house on my arrival, and occasion me no loss of time in waiting for them. On getting to the house, however, I found that they had not been heard of, and on inquiring at the station, it was stated that a case similar to the one I described had passed through and gone on to Leicester, where it probably still was. It being Friday and past the hour for the post, there was no possibility of getting a letter to Leicester before Monday morning, as the baggage office would be closed there on the Sundays. Consequently, I could in no case expect the arrival of the pictures before the succeeding Tuesday or Wednesday. The loss of 3 days would be a serious one. Therefore, to avoid it, I suggested to my hosts that I should leave immediately to transact some business in South Staffordshire, as I should be obliged to attend to it before my return to town, and if I could see about it in the vacant interval, thus thrown upon my hands, it would be saving me some amount of time after my visit to his house was concluded. This arrangement, meeting with his ready assent, I hastened to the Atherstone station on the Trent Valley Railway. By reference to Bradshaw, I found that my route lay through Lichfield, where I was to change carriages for another town in Staffordshire. I was just in time for the train that would put me down at Lichfield at 8 in the evening, and a train was announced to start from Lichfield to my other destination at 10 minutes after 8, answering, as I concluded, to the train in which I was about to travel. I therefore saw no reason to doubt but that I should go to my journey's end the same night, but on my arriving at Lichfield, I found my plans entirely frustrated. The train arrived punctually, and I got out intending to wait on the platform for the arrival of the carriages for the other line. I found, however, that though the two lines crossed at Lichfield, they did not communicate with each other, the Lichfield station on the Trent Valley line being on one side of the town and the Lichfield station on the South Staffordshire line on the other. I also found that there was not time to get to the other station so as to catch the train the same evening. Indeed, the train had just that moment passed on to a lower level beneath my feet, and to get to the other side of the town, where it would stop for 2 minutes only, was out of the question. There was therefore nothing for it but to put up at the Swan Hotel for the night. I have an especial dislike to passing an evening at an hotel in a country town. Dinner at such places I never take, as I had rather go without than have such as I am likely to get. Books are never to be had, the country newspapers do not interest me, the Times I have spelt through on my journey. The society I am likely to meet have few ideas in common with myself. Under such circumstances, I usually resort to a meat tea to while away the time, and when that is over, occupy myself in writing letters. This was the first time I had been in Lichfield, and while waiting for the tea, it occurred to me how, on 2 occasions within the past 6 months, I had been on the point of coming to that very place, at one time to execute a small commission for an old acquaintance, resident there, and another to get the materials for a picture. I proposed painting of an incident in the early life of Dr. Johnson. I should have come on each of these occasions had not other arrangements diverted my purpose and caused me to postpone the journey indefinitely. The thought, however, would occur to me, how strange! Here I am at Lichfield, by no intention of my own, though I have twice tried to get here and been balked. When I had done tea, I thought I ought as well write to an acquaintance I had known some years previously, and who lived in the Cathedral Close, asking him to come and pass an hour or two with me. Accordingly, I rang for the waitress and asked, "Does Mr. Lute live in Lichfield?" "Yes, sir." "Cathedral Close?" "Yes, sir." "Can I send a note to him?" "Yes, sir." I wrote the note, saying where I was, and asking if he would come for an hour or two and talk over old matters. The note was taken in about 20 minutes. A person of gentlemanly appearance and in what might be termed advanced middle age entered the room with my note in his hand, saying that I had sent him a letter. He presumed by mistake, as he did not know my name. Seeing instantly that he was not the person I intended to write to, I apologized and asked whether there was not another Mr. Lute living in Lichfield. "No, there is none other." "Certainly," I rejoined, "my friend must have given me his right address, for I had written to him on other occasions here. He was a fair young man. He succeeded to an estate in consequence of his uncle having been killed while hunting with the Quorn hounds, and he married about 2 years since a lady of the name of Fairburn." The stranger very composedly replied, "You are speaking of Mr. Klein. He did live in the Cathedral Close, but he has now gone away." The stranger was right, and in my surprise I exclaimed, "Oh dear, to be sure, that is the name. What could have made me address you instead? I really beg your pardon, my writing to you and unconsciously guessing your name. is one of the most extraordinary and unaccountable things I ever did. Pray, pardon me." He continued very quietly, "There is no need of an apology. It happens that you are the very person I most wish to see. You are a painter, and I want you to paint a portrait of my daughter. Can you come to my house immediately for the purpose?" I was rather surprised at finding myself known by him, and the turn matters had taken being so entirely unexpected. I did not at the moment feel inclined to undertake the business. I therefore explained how I was situate, stating that I had only the next day and Monday at my disposal. He, however, pressed me so earnestly that I arranged to do what I could for him in those 2 days, and having put up my baggage and arranged other matters, I accompanied him to his house. During the walk home he scarcely spoke a word, but his taciturnity seemed only a continuance of his quiet composure at the inn. On our arrival, he introduced me to his daughter Maria, and then left the room. Maria Lute was a fair and decidedly handsome girl of about 15. Her manner was, however, in advance of her years, and evinced that self-possession and, in the favourable sense of the term, that womanliness that is only seen at such an early age in girls that have been left motherless, or from other causes thrown much on their own resources. She had evidently not been informed of the purpose of my coming, and only knew that I was to stay there for the night. She therefore excused herself for a few moments, that she might give the requisite direction to the servants as to preparing my room. When she returned, she told me that I should not see her father again that evening, the state of his health having obliged him to retire for the night, but she hoped I should be able to see him sometime on the morrow. In the meantime, she hoped I would make myself quite at home and call for anything I wanted. She herself was sitting in the drawing-room, but perhaps I should like to smoke and take something. If so, there was a fire in the housekeeper's room, and she would come and sit with me, as she expected the medical attendant every minute, and he would probably stay to smoke and take something. As the little lady seemed to recommend this course, I readily complied. I did not smoke or take anything, but sat down by the fire, when she immediately joined me. She conversed well and readily, and with a command of language singular in a person so young. Without being disagreeably inquisitive or putting any question to me, she seemed desirous of learning the business that had brought me to the house. I told her that her father wished me to paint either her portrait or that of a sister of hers, if she had one. She remained silent and thoughtful for a moment, and then seemed to comprehend it at once. She told me that a sister of hers, an only one, to whom her father was devotedly attached, died near 4 months previously, that her father had never yet recovered from the shock of her death. He had often expressed the most earnest wish for a portrait of her. Indeed, it was his one thought, and she hoped if something of the kind could be done, it would improve his health. Here she hesitated, stammered, and then burst into tears. After a while she continued, "It is no use hiding from you what you must very soon be aware of. Papa is insane. He has been so ever since dear Caroline was buried. He says he is always seeing dear Caroline. He is subject to fearful delusions. The doctor says he cannot tell how much worse he may be, and that everything dangerous, like knives or razors, are to be kept out of his reach. It was necessary you should not see him again this evening, as he was unable to converse properly, and I fear the same may be the case tomorrow, but perhaps you can stay over Sunday, and I may be able to assist you in doing what he wishes." I asked whether they had any materials for making a likeness, a photograph, a sketch, or anything else for me to go from. No, they had nothing. Could she describe her clearly? She thought she could, and there was a print that was very much like her, but she had mislaid it. I mentioned that with such disadvantages and in such an absence of materials, I did not anticipate a satisfactory result. I had painted portraits under such circumstances, but their success much depended upon the powers of description of the persons who were to assist me by their recollection. In some instances, I had attained a certain amount of success, but in most, the result was quite a failure. The medical attendant came, but I did not see him. I learnt, however, that he ordered a strict watch to be kept on his patient till he came again the next morning. Seeing the state of things and how much the little lady had to attend to, I retired early to bed. The next morning I heard that her father was decidedly better. He had inquired earnestly on waking whether I was really in the house, and at breakfast time he sent down to say that he hoped nothing would prevent my making an attempt at the portrait immediately, and he expected to be able to see me in the course of the day. Directly after breakfast I set to work, aided by such description as the sister could give me. I tried again and again, but without success, or indeed the least prospect of it. The features, I was told, were separately like, but the expression was not. I toiled on the greater part of the day with no better result. The different studies I made were taken up to the invalid, but the same answer was always returned. No resemblance. I had exerted myself to the utmost, and in fact was not a little fatigued by so doing, a circumstance that the little lady evidently noticed, as she expressed herself most grateful for the interest she could see I took in the matter, and referred the unsuccessful result entirely to her want of powers of description. She also said it was so provoking. She had a print, a portrait of a lady that was so like, but it had gone. She had missed it from her book for 3 weeks past. It was the more disappointing, as she was sure it would have been of such great assistance. I asked if she could tell me who the print was of, as if I knew. I could easily procure one in London. She answered, Lady M.A. Immediately, the name was uttered. The whole scene of the lady of the railway carriage presented itself to me. I had my sketchbook in my portmanteau upstairs, and by a fortunate chance, fixed in it was the print in question, with the 2 pencil sketches. I instantly brought them down and showed them to Maria Lute. She looked at them for a moment, turned her eyes full upon me, and said slowly, and with something like fear in her manner, "Where did you get these?" Then quicker, and without waiting for my answer, "Let me take them instantly to Papa." She was away 10 minutes or more. When she returned, her father came with her. He did not wait for salutations, but said in a tone and manner I had not observed in him before, "I was right all the time. It was you that I saw with her, and these sketches are from her, and from no one else. I value them more than all my possessions, except this dear child here." The daughter also assured me that the print I had brought to the house must be the one taken from the book about 3 weeks before, in proof of which she pointed out to me the gum marks at the back, which exactly corresponded with those left on the blank leaf. From the moment the father saw these sketches, his mental health returned. I was not allowed to touch either of the pencil drawings in the sketchbook, as it was feared I might injure them, but an oil picture from them was commenced immediately. The father sitting by me hour after hour, directing my touches, conversing rationally, and indeed cheerfully while he did so. He avoided direct reference to his delusions, but from time to time led the conversation to the manner in which I had originally obtained the sketches. The doctor came in the evening, and after extolling the particular treatment he had adopted, pronounced his patient decidedly, and he believed permanently, improved. The next day being Sunday, we all went to church. The father, for the first time since his bereavement. During a walk, which he took with me after luncheon, he again approached the subject of the sketches, and after some seeming hesitation as to whether he should confide in me or not, said, "Your writing to me by name from the inn at Lichfield was one of those inexplicable circumstances that I suppose it is impossible to clear up. I knew you, however, directly I saw you. When those about me considered that my intellect was disordered, and that I spoke incoherently, it was only because I saw things that they did not. Since her death, I know, with a certainty, that nothing will ever disturb, that at different times I have been in the actual and visible presence of my dear daughter that is gone. Oftener, indeed, just after her death than latterly. Of the many times that this has occurred, I distinctly remember once seeing her in a railway carriage, speaking to a person seated opposite. Who that person was, I could not ascertain, as my position seemed to be immediately behind him. I next saw her at a dinner table with others, and amongst those others, unquestionably, I saw yourself. I afterwards learnt that at that time I was considered to be in one of my longest and most violent paroxysms, as I continued to see her speaking to you in the midst of a large assembly for some hours. Again I saw her standing by your side while you were engaged in either writing or drawing. I saw her once again afterwards, but the next time I saw you was in the inn parlour. The picture was proceeded with the next day, and on the day after, the face was completed, and I afterwards brought it with me to London to finish. I have often seen Mr. Lute since that period. His health is perfectly re-established, and his manner and conversation are as cheerful as can be expected within a few years of so great a bereavement. The portrait now hangs in his bedroom, with the print and the two sketches by the side, and written beneath is C.L. 13th of September 1858, aged 22. I confess to not having known that story before, but it had certain resonances. I liked it because it was a story of healing, and the healing came from the sense of presence. If you like, in our creed, the Communion of Saints speaks about that sense of presence even after death. And I remember when my sister, who had suffered so much from Parkinson's disease, was drawing, her life was drawing to a close, though we didn't know it at the end. She used to say to me when I visited her in her room at the nursing home, I see Mother standing here, you know, quite often. Do you see her? And I said, no, I don't. But the way in which my very rational sister said these things gave me the sense of the presence of my mother for her at that time, and that was comforting to her. And here is a Dickens story about healing. It also speaks of the way in which the painting of a portrait, and I've only had that done once, and it took many hours, 11 sittings of 3 hours, and it hangs now here in the house as an historic part of the collection of every Dean of Canterbury, hanging here, as they do. And it was painted by a young man, Jamie Corris, and we spent lots of time in silence, but it was a very creative silence, and the time spent felt very good time. And at the end, the portrait said so much more about me than an ordinary photograph would. And that also is evoked here. It was a lovely surprise to me to find that everything ended up in Lichfield. It's the cathedral church that I was ordained in, and I know that cathedral close very well indeed from my earliest years as a deacon and a priest. And so the vision of all that, and also the Angel Croft Hotel, which used to be just outside the close there, and which is, I think, probably speaking of with the Swan Hotel. It's no longer a hotel there, but it was the place where mother and father and my sister stayed for the ordination. All those things come together in this story, but at the same time, Dickens' wonderful way of evoking an atmosphere and different characters in a totally unhurried way, and giving such pleasure to the reader and the hearer, but also leaving so many questions unanswered, needing to be experienced and pondered and reflected on, and making us see that in our humanity we have so many different dimensions of experiencing things. So thank you for allowing me to read this story, because I've much enjoyed it.